The walls of the Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room rose like silent giants, polished marble, veined with history, echoing with the ghosts of verdicts and betrayals. Rows of seated staffers and press whispered in anticipation, their voices hushed but electric. A dozen cameras blinked like eyes that never sleep. C-SPAN, MSNBC, Fox, all live. The world was watching, even if most didn't know why yet. This was supposed to be a routine congressional oversight hearing. But in D.C., routine was code for explosive. The Department of Justice had drawn heat over allegations that it selectively enforced civil rights cases, pursuing some with vigor while letting others rot in silence. Accusations of institutional bias were back in the headlines. And for some, it wasn't just political. This was personal. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped into the chamber like a storm wrapped in stillness. Her stride was calculated but natural, eyes unwavering, dressed in black with a sharp emerald scarf that made her impossible to ignore. She didn't walk in angry. She walked in ready. A few seats to her left, Senator Tim Scott adjusted his lapel and leaned over to whisper something to a staffer. He exuded calm, measured, practiced to the untrained eye. He looked like the adult in the room, but Jasmine had seen this performance before. In boardrooms that ignored mothers sobbing for justice, in courtrooms that called pain anecdotal, and in hearings like this one, where polite men wrapped systemic denial in elegant diction. The chairman cleared his throat and opened the floor. This committee will come to order. Tim Scott's voice emerged first low, resonant, carefully worded. We are here today, not to inflame emotion, but to examine the Department of Justice's responsibility to apply the law evenly. Justice must be colorblind. Let us not allow the gravity of this chamber to be weighed down by performative outrage. The sentence hung in the air longer than necessary. Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply folded her hands, one thumb circling the other. Not yet. She knew how this would go. Let them talk. Let them posture. She didn't need to interrupt. Not today, because some storms don't announce themselves. They wait building, tightening until they break open the sky. And when she finally spoke, they would feel it, not like thunder, but like a verdict. Asterisk, the cameras had stopped blinking, but the real recording had just begun. Outside the chamber, media outlets ran split-screen footage. Jasmine Crockett sitting composed, Tim Scott speaking with solemnity. But to understand the tension between them, the press would have to dig deeper into two timelines, two philosophies, and one country that raised them both yet never reconciled what it meant. Timothy Eugene Scott had come from poverty. Raised by a single mother in North Charleston, his origin story was America's favorite kind bootstrap gospel. His voice, his suit, his careful diction, none of it was accidental. It had been earned, sharpened, and polished like armor. He believed in responsibility, in dignity without disruption, and in a country that, while imperfect, could correct itself through structure, not spectacle. He had survived by playing chess when everyone else played checkers. And that meant knowing when to strike and when to watch others. Self-destruct. Jasmine Crockett had survived something else entirely, born into a Dallas neighborhood lined with sirens and statistics. She had watched her community get legislated into silence. Her legal career wasn't built in ivory towers. It was forged in underfunded courtrooms where broken mothers begged for one more hearing, one more chance, one more hour before prison swallowed their sons. She didn't just believe in justice, she demanded it, even when the rules of decorum threatened to muzzle her voice. Especially then, she remembered the first time she heard the phrase, colorblind justice. It came from a judge who dismissed racial profiling as coincidence. It came from law professors who flinched at police footage. It came from men like Tim Black, educated, powerful, who asked for patience when the streets asked for answers, and now here they were, seated across from each other in a chamber that looked too polished for truth. She glanced toward him. He wasn't looking at her, not yet. But the tension between them wasn't theatrical, it was generational, it was philosophical. Two paths, carved from the same stone, now colliding under fluorescent lights and high ceilings. The chairman shuffled his notes. We will now move to witness testimony. Jasmine didn't need to speak yet. Her moment was coming, but even now, in this moment of supposed stillness, something tectonic was already shifting in the room, because when two histories sit across from each other, and only one is allowed to speak, the silence becomes its own form of protest. Senator Scott adjusted his microphone, his fingertips grazing the polished brass as if steadying himself. Then his voice emerged, measured and deliberate, like someone testifying before history rather than just the committee. We must be careful not to substitute passion for policy. He began, his eyes moving across the room, avoiding Jasmine's gaze with practiced ease. The Department of Justice is not an emotional instrument. It is a legal one. And in this hearing, we're not here to relitigate America's wounds. We're here to examine the integrity of its stitches. A few heads nodded. The cadence was comforting, predictable, clean. Jasmine didn't blink. Her hands were still. Her eyes trained not on Scott, but on the small red light on the recording camera across from her, because she understood what this was. This was the preamble to erasure. The kind that doesn't scream but softly, politely, suffocates, Scott continued, his tone tightening just enough to signal a veiled accusation. We do ourselves no favor if we turn these hearings into platforms for outrage. The American people want solutions, not slogans. And there it was. The first spark, across the chamber, a staffer scribbled a note on a legal pad. A junior journalist tweeted, Scott throwing shade at Crockett without naming her. Online it began, but Jasmine remained immovable. Her mic was off, her body still. But her silence wasn't passive, it was loaded. She leaned back slightly in her chair, the barest movement but in a room hyper-attuned to tension. It felt like thunder on the horizon. The chairman looked around nervously, sensing something brewing but unwilling to name it. Scott closed his statement. Let us be clear-eyed. Justice is not a feeling. It's a framework. Jasmine's lips parted slightly. Not to speak, but to breathe, because what he just said wasn't wrong. But it was incomplete, and incomplete truths were more dangerous than lies. Her pen tapped once against the wooden desk. A small sound, but sharp enough to draw the eyes of a nearby reporter. She could have responded. She wanted to. But restraint too was a weapon. Let them build the illusion of control. Let them thread their comfort into the record. And then, when the timing was right, she'd cut through it, not to be heard, but to be undeniable. The next day, the temperature in the hearing room had changed not physically but atmospherically. Something was different. The room knew it. The staff knew it. The public watching from millions of living rooms, office desktops, and live streams felt it. Senator Scott returned with a sharpened tone, emboldened by overnight headlines. His comments had been praised on certain outlets as measured moral clarity. Behind the scenes, his advisors encouraged him to go further, frame the hearing, own the tone. He didn't need to raise his voice. He only had to twist the blade softly. This country is being torn apart, Scott said, addressing the chamber. Not by what we've done, but by how we speak about what's been done. We weaponize grievance, we monetize pain. We create celebrity out of conflict. His gaze flicked toward Jasmine, barely, just long enough for the message to register without naming her. And then it came. I have to ask, at what point does the pursuit of justice become indistinguishable from the performance of it? There it was. The bait, a ripple of audible tension spread through the room, like a gasp trapped under breath. Jasmine didn't react immediately. She blinked once, her eyes narrowing just slightly, like a soldier marking a sniper's position. Inside, something shifted. Not anger, precision, a quiet calculation of everything she'd seen, heard, buried. She looked down at the notes she had written last night, the speech she had planned. Then slowly, deliberately, she pushed the paper aside. She wouldn't need it. The chairman, flustered, cleared his throat. Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond? She didn't answer right away. Silence filled the void he expected her to rush into. She let the second stretch. Then finally softly, not. Yet, it was more powerful than any rebuttal. The kind of silence that burns hotter than retort. Scott leaned back, confused for half a second, then covered it with a smile. He thought he had won that exchange. that his jab had gone unanswered, but Jasmine wasn't playing the short game. She knew what he was trying to do: provoke her, define her, box her into the archetype they were waiting to dismiss. The angry black woman card, they always kept it ready in their pockets. Right next to the Constitution they loved to quote but rarely read in full. Let him talk, let him escalate. Because when she finally stood to speak, she wouldn't just respond, she'd rewrite the terms of the entire debate. By the time the hearing room emptied that evening, the real storm had already broken, but not under the dome of the Capitol. It was online, where perception metastasized in minutes and every pause, glance, or smirk could be clipped and remixed. For virality, Jasmine watched it unfold from her office window glass, separating her from the chaos, but not the pressure. Aides buzzed in the hallway. Notifications flooded her phone. She ignored them all. On one screen, a right-wing pundit hailed Tim Scott for holding the line against political theater. On another, a liberal commentator called his remarks a betrayal dressed in civility. But the most viral clip wasn't from Tim. It was Jasmine's silence, her stillness, the way she looked at him after he accused her of turning justice into performance. A TikTok had already added orchestral music beneath the footage. Edits slowed the moment her eyes narrowed. On Instagram, users were captioning it. This is how a storm looks before it speaks. She didn't smile at the praise. It felt premature. She hadn't done anything yet. In the center of her desk, the speech she had discarded lay folded like a forgotten confession. She reached for it, then stopped. What she had written was good, statistically sound, politically balanced, morally certain. But it was also safe. And this moment didn't call for safe. Across town, Tim Scott sat in a high-rise media studio. Cameras framed him in soft light as he prepared for his segment on the Situation Room. A producer whispered something about Jasmine's viral silence. Scott waved it off. She's good at the optics game, he said quietly. Let her have her moment. But inside, something tugged at him, something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt? No, not yet. But proximity to a reckoning? He could feel it looming in her restraint. Back in her office, Jasmine closed the window, locking out the city's noise. The city where statues stood taller than some truths. Where power wasn't just held, but hoarded. She picked up a blank legal pad. And began writing again. Not for applause. Not for virality, but for the kind of clarity that turned silence into thunder, because when she finally spoke, she wouldn't aim for his ego, she'd aim for the system that created it. The leak hit like a spark in dry brush. A confidential memo, unsigned but authenticated by internal DOJ timestamps, began circulating in journalist circles. The document detailed an internal recommendation to pursue federal charges in a Mississippi case where a 14-year-old black boy had been shot by an off-duty deputy. The DOJ had declined to act. No explanation. No follow-up. Now it was public. By morning, the document had been uploaded to a congressional server anonymously. A whistleblower, unnamed. But the intention was clear. Someone inside the DOJ wanted this exposed. And Jasmine Crockett wasted no time. She walked into the hearing chamber holding the memo in one hand like a live grenade. The room hadn't even filled yet, but aides took notice. One staffer texted their boss, "She's bringing heat today." As the hearing resumed, Jasmine calmly requested unanimous consent to submit the document into the record. Tim Scott stiffened. "The document is anonymous, Congresswoman," he said, leaning forward. "Are we now codifying rumor into record?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "It's not rumor, Senator. It's documentation, time-stamped, Doge server logged." "If it walks like suppression and smells like suppression," Scott interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp, "then perhaps it's slander. And you're dangerously close to accusing public servants without proof." The room inhaled collectively. Jasmine's voice remained steady. "I'm accusing the system, Senator. If individuals feel targeted by the truth, maybe they should ask why." The chairman paused. "We'll take this under review." But it didn't matter. The document was already circulating online, discussed in newsrooms, dissected in Twitter threads. It had pierced the professional decorum that cloaked the hearing like thick velvet. Tim Scott's team began working damage control before lunch. They claimed the document was not verified, misinterpreted, potentially fabricated, but privately, Scott was rattled. He knew the DOJ had buried uncomfortable cases before. That was the quiet price of political balance of appearing impartial while remaining complicit. Across the chamber, Jasmine watched him. Not with triumph, with precision. This wasn't about winning. It was about exposing the rot in the framing of justice itself, because once something is leaked, you can't unsee it, and the public, now hungry for accountability, had seen enough to stop believing in polite silence. They were waiting, and Jasmine was just getting started. The hallway outside the chamber was quiet, unnaturally so. Reporters had been ushered away for the lunch recess. Cameras had gone still. For a brief moment, Washington exhaled, but inside the marble corridors, the pressure only thickened. Jasmine Crockett stood by the window, gazing at the Capitol dome. The light hit it in that late-day way that made it look more like mythology than architecture. Beneath it, democracy labored to hold its shape. Footsteps approached behind her, measured, deliberate. She didn't turn. "I assume you're proud of that stunt," Tim Scott said evenly, stopping a few feet away. Jasmine didn't respond at first. The silence stretched until it felt like a dare. "Which part?" She finally asked without looking back. "Submitting a document? Or daring to tell the truth with the lights still on?" Scott exhaled through his nose, choosing his next words with care. "You and I both know how this works. Drop a leak, make a scene, go viral. It's not about justice. It's about attention." Jasmine turned now, slowly. Her eyes didn't flash. They steadied. "You confuse visibility with vanity," she said. "I didn't leak that document. And even if I had, maybe truth needs a little spectacle when the system prefers silence." Scott's jaw tensed, just slightly. "You're turning this chamber into a stage." She took a step closer, her voice lowering. "No, this chamber has always been a stage, Senator. You just prefer your monologues uninterrupted." For a moment, neither spoke. The fluorescent light hummed above them, and far off, someone's footsteps echoed against the marble. Then Scott looked away, toward the floor. "You think I don't care," he muttered, "but I do." Jasmine's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "Then, stop hiding behind decorum. It never protected us. It only preserved the illusion that we didn't need protection." Scott didn't answer. Instead, he nodded once curt, unsure, and walked away. Jasmine remained at the window. She didn't feel victorious. She felt confirmed, not that she was right, but that the mask was slipping, even for him, and once people start seeing each other clearly across the aisle, across history, nothing in that chamber feels safe anymore, especially the silence. The chamber was at capacity. The press bench overflowed. The public gallery, normally half empty during weekday hearings, was packed. Students, legal observers, community organizers, all seated shoulder to shoulder. A single sentence from Jasmine Crockett's hallway exchange with Tim Scott had leaked. It wasn't recorded, but it spread like wildfire. "You confuse visibility with vanity." The room now expected blood. Jasmine adjusted her microphone slowly, her finger brushing the base before leaning in. Her voice, when it came, wasn't loud, it was sharpened steel. "For the record," she began, "I did not leak the DOJ memo. But I'm grateful to the person who did, because transparency isn't treason, it's survival." She lifted the document. "This isn't just a memo, it's a grave marker. A silent report about a child, unarmed, dead. And about an institution that looked at that death and decided it wasn't worth federal time." Across from her, Tim Scott leaned forward, one brow raised, chin resting lightly on folded hands. The picture of calm disapproval. Jasmine wasn't done. "And for those in this chamber who worry more about procedure than people," she said, turning ever so slightly toward Scott, "I ask, where was your procedure when mothers knocked on DOJ doors and were met with nothing but echo?" Scott tapped his nameplate. He was ready to respond. The chairman nodded. "Senator Scott?" Scott's tone was icy, practiced. "Congresswoman, I appreciate your passion, but we can't govern by anecdote. We have to build a country on principles, not protests." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. "Principles like silence?" Scott didn't flinch. Principles like equal justice, regardless of emotion, background, or media attention. That's when it broke. She sat forward, eyes locked on his. Equal justice? She said, voice tight with restraint. Don't recite poetry while bodies are still warm. Equal justice means accountability, not distance. It means a system that doesn't require press leaks to tell the truth. Scott tried to interject. She raised a hand not to silence him, but to signal the room. You keep saying I'm emotional. I am, because the law has been too cold for too long. Maybe it's time it felt something. The room froze. The chairman, speechless, glanced between them. Jasmine sat back, calm again, outside. Social media detonated. Hashtag cold law trended within 17 minutes. And for the first time in that chamber, a legal argument had become something more than political. It had become human. And that they could not control. The courtroom lights hummed faintly overhead, casting long, unforgiving shadows across the panel. Jasmine sat motionless, but the fire in her chest hadn't dimmed. It was now discipline. Focused. Ted Cruz finally spoke. Madam Chair, he said, adjusting his cufflinks without looking at anyone. Since we're apparently allowing leaked documents and emotional anecdotes to dictate legal discourse, I'd like to clarify what this hearing is actually about. All eyes turned. Cruz held up a copy of the leaked DOJ memo, now stamped with the word unredacted across the top. This, he continued, is a fragment. A manipulated fragment. And before this body descends into performance theater, let me remind everyone that federal investigations are bound by due process, not viral outrage. He looked at Jasmine then. Not just looked challenged. Congresswoman Crockett, he said coolly, your rhetoric is passionate, but let's not pretend it's principled. It's political. A low ripple moved through the gallery. Jasmine didn't blink. She rose from her chair slowly, each movement deliberate, as if the silence itself bowed to her. You're right, Senator Cruz, she said. This is political. So was Selma. So was Stonewall. So was every moment where the law lagged behind the people it claimed to protect. Cruz smiled faintly, feigning amusement. Jasmine turned fully toward him now. Documents still in her hand. But let's talk about manipulation, since that's your expertise, she said, voice tightening. Because this fragment contains a pattern 12 cases dismissed for lack of federal interest, all involving officers and unarmed black civilians. That's not manipulation. That's math, murmurs. Pen scratching. Phones vibrating under benches. Cruz leaned forward. I understand you need a villain, Congresswoman, he said, almost softly. But I'm not the system. You're arguing with a mirror. Jasmine stepped closer to the center of the dais. Breaking protocol, but no one stopped her. I don't need a villain, she replied. I need accountability. And if you won't name the problem, Senator, I will. She tapped the memo with her finger. What we permit, we promote. This silence is policy. This neglect is legislative. You may not wear a badge, but you've voted to shield the ones who kill with theirs. Dead silence. Then a single clap. Someone in the gallery. Then another. The chairman pounded his gavel. But the rhythm had already changed. Outside, hashtag mirror justice trended. Jasmine's words were clipped, subtitled, dissected by millions. And in that moment, she knew. This wasn't about Cruz or the memo. It was about reminding the country that justice without emotion is not justice, it's theater for the privileged. And she had just ripped open the curtain, asterisk outside the federal courthouse. The air was electric. Protesters pressed against metal barricades, phones held high, streaming every second. Banners read, "Justice delayed is justice denied," and say their names, all of them. Inside, the hearing was briefly recessed, but the battle had only just begun. A junior aide rushed to Jasmine's side, whispering urgently, "It's trending everywhere. CNN just cut into their regular broadcast. Fox is running your quote." Out of context, obviously. Jasmine nodded without reacting. Let them. The full video's louder than their spin. Her phone vibrated again and again. The audio clip, "What we permit, we promote," had exploded across TikTok and Twitter. used under videos of police brutality, under body cam footage long buried, under black mothers crying on courthouse steps. The phrase had become a weapon. A prayer, a warning. Back in the chamber, the tension had metastasized into strategy. Staffers whispered. Committees reconsidered alliances. And in a rare moment of bipartisan discomfort, silence reigned among those who normally wielded noise like a sword. Cruz sat in stony stillness. He was calculating, not beaten. When Jasmine returned to her seat, she found a folded piece of paper left on her folder, typed. Anonymous. It read, "They'll come for you next. You broke the fourth wall, no signature, no clue. Just a promise." She folded it, slid it into her pocket, and exhaled through her nose like someone who had seen too many warnings before. Then, from across the aisle, Representative Delgado, from Illinois, a Republican, known for staying out of messy hearings, leaned toward the mic. "I'd like to submit the full DOJ memo into the record," he said, voice measured, "and request a formal subcommittee review of the dismissed cases Congresswoman Crockett cited." Stunned silence. Even Jasmine's head tilted. Delgado nodded slightly to her, almost imperceptibly. A man breaking ranks, not because he agreed, but because the political cost of silence had finally exceeded the risk of dissent. That one gesture, Republican yielding to a Democrat's moral gravity, was the story the networks hadn't prepared for. CNN's Chiron changed. GOP representative joins. Crockett in memo probe. What's in the DOJ files? Back in the gallery, reporters sprinted out the door. Back on Twitter, hashtag fourth wall trended beside hashtag mirror justice. And in millions of living rooms across America, Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a name. She was a reckoning. A symbol of what happens when someone doesn't just call out the lie but dares to tell the truth so loud. Even the powerful flinch. The courthouse corridors were quieter now, but not calmer. Jasmine stepped into the hallway, needing a breath. Cameras still flashed through the glass, but for a moment, she was alone, almost. Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, expecting her aide. Instead, it was Attorney General Matthew Rillance, tall, clean-cut, and ice-eyed. Rillance was the architect of the very memo Jasmine had exposed, though publicly he dismissed it as incomplete legal theory. Privately, everyone knew he was protecting the rot. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, his tone almost civil. "A word?" She didn't flinch. "You've had plenty of them, all of them redacted." He offered a tight smile. "You know you've made enemies, real ones. Not just the Twitter kind." "I wasn't elected to make friends," she replied, cool and level. "I was elected to make the law mean something." Rillance's jaw flexed. "You think a few sound bites and a trending hashtag will overturn systems built brick by brick over decades?" he asked. "This country survives because people like me know where the boundaries are. You just erased one." Jasmine stepped closer, her voice low and deliberate. "You think I erased a boundary?" "No, I revealed it, the line between justice and performance. You just don't like that I put a spotlight on it." He looked at her, really looked. "This won't end in a headline. It'll end in a closed door and a closed case." Jasmine didn't blink. "Then I'll kick down every damn door until there's light inside." They stood, two silhouettes in a hallway painted with history portraits of men who wrote laws for themselves, not for the people who bled under them. And then he said it. "You're a moment. I'm the machine." She leaned in, whispering, "Machines break, and moments? They spark revolutions." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing like a gavel. Jasmine stood still, her breath steady, her heart iron. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the building creaked, not from age, but from the tectonic shift she had triggered. The hallway. Cameras didn't catch that exchange, but her team did later. That 17-second clip would leak. And when it did, it would be captioned, "The moment the machine met its mirror." Back in the media holding room, Jasmine's communications director, Layla Shah, sat hunched over her phone, editing something quietly. Urgently. The hallway confrontation had been captured, just barely on a backup phone camera worn on Layla's lapel. Shaky, dim, imperfect, perfect, Layla added subtitles. "You're a moment. I'm the machine. Machines break. Moments spark revolutions." She glanced once at Jasmine, Then at the trending page hash Crockett V's, the system was already climbing. But this clip? This was different. She added a caption. He thought no one would hear this. Now 50 million people will. She posted for 2 minutes nothing, then the notifications exploded, retweeted by @Occupy Democracy. Stitch by @Lawyer Queen, just double quotes shared by @Progressive Post. Then a DM, Rachel Maddow wanted to use the clip tonight, and then Elon Musk tweeted, not a post. Not a reply, just a quote of the video and the word, the feed COMBUSTD. By 4 p.m. TikTok had it on the For You page in 7 countries. By 6 p.m. It had been translated into Spanish, French, Urdu, Korean. By 8 p.m. it was on MSNBC, CNN, and the BBC, and Jasmine hadn't even sat down for the next hearing session. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit boardroom at a PAC headquarters in Arlington, Rilance's phone buzzed again and again. He stared at the clip, looping. The worst part wasn't her words. It was her face, calm, defiant, dead center in the frame. A still shot of her whispering into the heart of the machine. She meant it, he muttered. An aide entered. Sir, the Hill's requesting comment. And the Oversight Subcommittee just opened a separate ethics review into the detainee order? Rylance rubbed his temples. No comment, delay everything. And bury that review under something else. Any scandal will do. Sir? Find a distraction, preferably liberal, preferably loud. Back at the courthouse, Jasmine sat alone again, except for Layla, who showed her the clip. She watched in silence and then said, "We didn't plan that moment." Layla nodded, "But it's the only thing they'll remember." Jasmine turned toward the courtroom doors. They'll remember what comes next, too. And with that, she stood. As the gavel echoed inside, the crowd outside was swelling, not in protest. In anticipation, asterisk.